5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. We are live. Micah McCurry live, number 18, with my brother-in-law, Austin Merriott, assistant pastor at the First Baptist Church of Dwight in Dwight, Illinois. The first question I always ask, in just a second, is 50 to 100 words. Tell us who you are. But first, I appreciate those that are tuning in, those that will tune in, and I greatly appreciate it. Just a quick, administration thing. The podcast, I've been calling it a podcast, and it was never really a podcast, because I think by definition, because it was never anywhere in audio form. It was just this. And so it's finally live on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, all those places. Not all of them yet. There's only like 3 live currently. But so if you like to listen to the audio version, it just takes a little while to edit them and all that stuff. So if you like to listen to audio version, you can do that. But we're live with Austin Merriott here. Could you give us a quick introduction to who you are?
Sure. 50 to 100 words or less. I don't know if I've
everybody goes over except for the people that give, like, just say, I'm John Doe and I work at, and they go under. So you feel free. Take your time.
Okay. 50 to 100 words. Well, yes, my name is Austin Merriott. Like Micah said, I am the youth pastor at First Baptist Church in Dwight, Illinois. I've been in ministry since I was 16 years old, and pretty much ministry is all I've ever known. And I thank the Lord for that, for giving me that opportunity. I'm married to my wife, Rachel. We've been married for 11 years coming up in June. We have 2 kids. Adelaide is my oldest. She's 5 years old, and I'll be 6 in July. And then Lemuel, my son, and he is going to be 2 in May. And so the Lord has really blessed me, and I'm very excited to be on with you today. And but that is, I think, hopefully less than 100 words.
It's all right. One of the great things about, you love family. You should love family, but it's always nice. It's always nice though when you get along with family, and that's
true. You can love them, but you don't necessarily have to get along with them.
Right, and you don't always like them. But I can say, at least from my side, I won't ask from your side, but at least from my side, we've always we've taken vacations together, as families sometimes do, but we've always had a good time. Maybe it's because you always win at golf. Maybe that's why you always have a good time. But we have a good time together, and so that's a blessing. I appreciate him coming on. I'm going to kind of go a different direction. We're going to just dive right into some questions. And we're going to get to.
Well, hold on, before we get into that question, I have to ask you.
Go ahead. All right, you said you're going to ask me a question.
Yeah, this one question that I must ask, because it's been bothering me ever since I've watched the last 17, whatever these are called, not podcasts, why the countdown and why the 10 seconds before we start talking?
So
in 50 or 100 words.
Yeah. I don't know if I'll be able to do that. Don't put me on the spot like that, man. So for those that don't know, we do a quick little pre-interview beforehand just to make sure everything's working correctly. And then we all tell the people, we're going to go 10 seconds of radio silence, and then I'm going to do a 10-second countdown. The reason for the 10-second countdown that you hear is because I'm using a system that lets me go live to it restreams it to multiple places all at once, and all of them have like a different buffering time. Some jump on like immediately when you click. Some actually like backdate it like 10 seconds. Some like wait a few seconds. So we're live on Twitch, 2 Facebook pages, my Facebook page, Micah McCurry, and then Micah McCurry Live for the actual podcast, whatever. On Periscope, which also streams to Twitter at the same time, and YouTube all at once. And so when I click that, it just kind of gives me that buffer time. Now, I am kind of cutting out some in the actual podcast, the audio form. So for most of them, you're just going to hear like 3, 2, 1 and go, or it just fades in from 3 on 3, 2, 1. But that's the answer, because technically, I don't want to cut off. Number 18 with,
right,
Austin Merriott. And so that kind of,
I was hoping to get your cool intro that I heard. I got an alert that you had got it set up, and then I was hoping to get your intro there, but I didn't get to hear it on
the intro music.
Yeah.
So that's a very cool story. That's a very cool story.
Good stuff.
I mean, this is your interview. Can I share that story on your interview?
Sure.
All right. I'll take some time. It's all right. So, Are you familiar with? I ask you, are you familiar with Brother Byron Fox, Evangelist Byron Fox?
Vaguely, not.
Okay.
I know the name, but that's
So,
about it.
and that's one of the coolest things that for me, I think about doing these interviews and things is introducing people. You were, I did that quick poll as, how many of you have listened to, know like 8 or more of these
Right.
people. And at that point it was like 13. So it was a little over half, and like only 25% of the people knew. Maybe it's a third, but anyway, so it was cool. I think it's cool to be able to introduce people to some good independent fundamental Baptist guys. And Brother Fox he's already told me that he's going to be on. I invited him, but he's an evangelist. He does a lot of different things. Bible Truth Music, if you're familiar with him.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, so he's the guy that heads that up. Bible Truth, the hymnal. They put out a lot of good music. He just cut 2 CDs with Faith Music with Brother Chamberlain and Ed Russ and all them. Good singer, great choir director, just great all around music. Anyway, so we have this God Bless America rally coming up in May of 2019 here in the Stark County, Akron, Canton area.
Yeah.
And I'm one of the social media for it. And so we had some meeting, an admin type thing, and Brother Fox wasn't able to be there. And so I texted him, like, this is like 9:00 at night, and said, hey, Brother Fox, just have a quick question for you before I post something. Want to get your permission? And I said, if you can't call tonight, that's fine. Tomorrow's great. So he calls me like that night, 9:30. And he's just the most personable guy. And so we're talking, and we don't get off the phone till close to 10 because I asked the question, and he's just chatting and giving me some of his time. And he told me, and hopefully I'm not giving out too much detail with the Fox if you're watching. But he said, I'm just sitting here watching Bonanza. And so, I mean, talking to you is just as good as that, I guess. And so, but anyway.
Man,
so
you rank with Bonanza.
I know, right? It's a classic. And so I asked him, because I've been trying to find, and you know how difficult this is doing radio, finding good intro, outro music. And this is not secular in nature. And so something with a heavy beat is out the window. And so finding anything besides elevator music is just so hard. And it costs money. It's not much, $25-$30. But if I found the perfect one, that'd be great. Anyway, so I asked him, with your experience in music, where should I find good music like that?
Right.
And so we talked about it for a second, and then he said, you know what? Let me basically he said, let me call Glenn. That's Glenn Christensen. And if you know who that is, that's his name is probably in the top right hand corner of a lot of the music that we sing. He composes a lot of music. And let me see if he can make some for you. And I was like, okay. I was super taken aback because I was like, I wasn't asking you to do that. I didn't even know. I assume they have that capability, obviously. But so anyway, I get a text at 11:30 that night, and he said, "I called Glenn. We've been sitting in the studio, and I couldn't fall asleep, so I just started making it for you." He called me the next morning and said, "I just emailed over the opening closing for you," and he stayed up basically all night making. Understand. This is a man who he was preaching that Saturday. It was this Friday night. He was preaching that day. Or had some kind of choir seminar or something, and he stayed up all night to make an opening. Now, I'm not saying don't just call him and say, "Hey, can you make me podcast intro outros?" Because he's not going to do it for everyone. But somehow I ranked, and it was and the awesome. And he said, "Brother," and you have to know about the Fox. He's so personal. If you don't like it, it's not a problem. Whatever. I'm thinking, how can I say no? But if you watch the Fox, it was like exactly what I was looking for. It has that kind of cinematic, not like the Pirates of the Caribbean type, because that's way too what's the word I'm looking for? Everyone knows that, but has that feel to it. And so anyway, that's the story. Now let's get to you, because
awesome.
This is not it's just a cool story. So anyway, so where was I going? Oh. The question I was about to ask before I was rudely interrupted with your 10-second question, 10-second countdown question. Just because I'm curious, a quote that I've used of yours that may or may not be yours, dozens, if not 100-something times. You preached at the Northwest Youth Conference, maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago. I'm not sure how long ago that was. And you said something to the effect, I may be paraphrasing. You said, the decision to follow Christ cannot be made as a group. And that, for some reason, that stuck with me. I took our teens to camp the very next, 3-4 weeks after that, maybe. And I used it I've used it numerous times. I'm curious, where, just for me personally, where did you get that quote from? Or is it yours?
I I don't know if I could claim it or not because it sounds too good. I'm sure I got it from somewhere. Um, I honestly don't even remember.
Okay.
Like you said, that was quite a few years ago.
Sure.
But the truth, a lot of times, different quote. I mean, my guess is a lot of the stuff that I use, a lot of quotes that I use, I get from Spurgeon. I
Okay.
just absolutely love him.
Yeah.
I love how the way that I say it is he eloquently makes you feel like an inch tall.
Right.
He'll just use the most eloquent of words, but just cut you to pieces.
Right.
And I love it. I love the way that he writes. And but really, truth is truth.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it comes from me, nobody, or someone like Spurgeon who's changed
Sure.
millions of lives. And the truth of that statement is so true that it is not a group decision. Yes, when you're in a group setting and you have a group of people who are on fire for God, and in the instance of a youth group, when you have a group that is all on the same page, you can do some amazing things. I mean, you look at in Acts when they were all in one accord, what happened? They turned the world upside down. But it doesn't take a group, and you look at all the major, many of, I don't want to say all, I don't want to use all inclusive words, but many of the major revivals that have taken place through history have started with one or two people. It wasn't a group. It was, one or two people getting on their knees and begging God. And that decision is something that you have to decide on your own. And it's, it's a great thought. I don't remember where I got it from, but I'm glad it impacted you 5 or 6
2
or 7
thumbs
years
up.
ago.
No, I've used it, and the 1 or 2 I think preached at camp 2 years after that. I used it there. I've used it with our teen group many times. And I've said, I would love if I could just tie you all together, and all the pastors in the room, all the youth pastors in the room, could just drag you to God's will, but we can't.
Yeah.
And that would be easier. Even though that'd be physically such a strain, that would be easier than getting some people. But and the thought I had when you were saying, in one accord, and you see youth groups where everyone's on fire, it's so it seems, and somehow someone slips through the cracks, even from those the most spiritual youth groups. You have those. So even when the group is all going, you still have that deal. But I love the quote. I was just curious for myself.
I'll Google it. I'll tell you.
Sounds good. And if Google can't tell you, we'll just have to put a little asterisk on some Marriott.
There you go. Yeah. To prove you wrong.
Exactly. And so you only have 999 more quotes to go before you can write a quote book from Austin Marriott, and you'll be good to go. So you've been in ministry, and you may have said during the intro, but how long have you been in ministry now?
I started working on staff at Northwest Bible Baptist Church. I was either 15 or 16 years old. It was going into my junior year in high school, the end of my sophomore year, start of my junior year. So that would have been 2002.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, 2002. No, yeah, 2002. So what's that? 17 years.
Nice.
And so started there in high school. Went to college at Providence Baptist College. Worked, transitioned after a year sabbatical that we won't get into, but came back on staff at Providence and worked there. And then we transitioned out to Iowa, worked at Twin Pines Baptist Church in Cedar Rapids, which they're now in Robbins, Iowa, but worked there for several years as youth pastor. And then felt the Lord wanted us to move to Dwight. And so we did that. We've been here coming on now. I think it's almost we're in our 5th year now, fourth or 5th year.
So I was gonna say, you guys came there the month or two right after, or right before, right before or after football camp that we moved out here, and so we're pushing 5 years too. Very good. Yeah,
so we'll come up on our 5th year
now, and we might get into this, but it does factor in. How long has your dad been working there at Northwest?
Well, he started at Northwest in '89. Before that, he worked at Central Baptist Church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Okay.
He's been on staff or working in some sort of capacity at a church since he was about probably 15 or 16 years old as well.
Very nice.
So not 17 years, quite a few more. But yeah, he's been in ministry his whole life as well.
I put that little question out about who some other names I should have on, and I think two people might have even put Stacy Marriott, and so I was thinking, that would be, and that's I think we talked about one of the cool things about, there are so many people that it's not, I don't, you understand, I'm saying that, not saying this disparagingly, but they're never going to have their name up on a marquee, but man, right. they have just served God. They have just done, and talk about, just keeping the buses rolling. I mean, how many young men and women from the Chicagoland, Elgin area are going to be chalked up on Stacy Marriott's account because of what he's done. And we can get into that, and I think we will a little bit later on. But you have, and we probably spend maybe the majority of the time here, but you have a pretty cool story that's kind of unfolded over the last, how long ago did it ping on your radar, and maybe even all the way back to as a young child? When did, I'll let you kind of unfold it for us.
Okay. So it all, the unfolding of it really started really just about two or 3 months before Rachel and I got married. And so that would have been in 2008. It was about 2 or 3 months after my mom had passed away. And she passed away in January 2008. And then in May, June timeframe, we got married in the end of June, but April, May, somewhere in there, my dad had the contact information for my biological mother. Those of you that don't know, I'm adopted, and I was adopted when I was 18 hours old. My parents, Stacy and Carol Merriott, came to the hospital in Arkansas, picked me up from the hospital, took me back to Baton Rouge. My sister Sharon Merriott, or Ballesteros now, is also adopted. She's 2.5 years older than me, but she was adopted. We're not biologically related at all. You'd never know that growing up. Size is the only thing that makes us look different. Both have blonde hair, and we looked like twins when we were little. And then I started growing, and she just stayed the same. And but we're both adopted. And let me back up just a little bit before we get into like the unfolding of it. So, looking back, I tell people I don't remember a time. My dad might be able to tell you when it was, but really I don't remember a time where, we got home from school or church saying, my parents said, hey, we need to talk to y'all, and you guys are adopted. I don't remember that time. I don't remember a specific point in my life when I found out that I was adopted. It was like I always knew. It wasn't ever a secret. It wasn't ever something that, my parents didn't want me to know about. They just always told me. And I think part of, and Sharon could tell you differently, I don't want to speak for her, but for me, I never had, I've heard some stories of different children, people that have been adopted, and that they had this burning desire to find who their real parents are. And not as a knock to my biological parents at all, but I had my parents. My parents were are Stacy and Carol Merriott. And I always thought it was the most amazing thing in the world that I was adopted, and I know that there's individuals out there who really struggle with that. They struggle with the bitterness. They struggle with the fact that, why would my mom or my biological parents, why would they not want me? And really, it's not that I don't think I'm not spiritual enough to say that there was a point where I made this decision. It was always this way for me. I never viewed it that way. And I believe perspective on a situation is a vital part of how you respond to that situation, is your perspective on it. And there's a lot of young people who have been adopted, and their perspective is that my parents forsook me. They didn't want me. They hated me. They didn't think that I was good enough to be in their family. Whatever the case may be. I never had that thought. One of the things growing up younger, I thought it was the most amazing thing to be adopted, because this didn't happen often, but maybe once or twice in my childhood, someone might make fun, that I was adopted, and that they're not my real parents. And I'll never forget, I always I love the opportunity to be able to say, well, you know what? My mom and dad chose me. Your parents didn't get a choice. They got you no matter what, but my parents chose me. And I always thought that was the most amazing thing in the world, that I had two individuals who, they're not my blood, but they chose me. They wanted me in their life. And as a child, I thought that was amazing. I thought that was so neat. And again, talking about perspective, as I then transitioned, as I got older, more mature, and really started to think about it, I always told people if I ever had the chance to meet or to talk to my biological mom, I wanted to tell her, the first thing I wanted to say to her was thank you. Thank you for not aborting me. And she very well easily could have. I didn't really know much of the story. I didn't know much of the background. I knew that she was a teenager. I knew she wasn't married. And so, it was a different time back then. So abortion was not as prevalent as it is today, regrettably, that it's more prevalent today. But that obviously could have been an option. And the fact that she didn't, I just was eternally grateful for that. And I always said, if I ever got the chance, I want to be able to tell her that if I don't get to do anything else, I'm fine, as long as I can just tell her that. But then as time progressed, and now fast forward to 2008, and my dad hands me this email address and says, hey, this is your biological mom, if you want to contact her. And so I did. I sent an email, and that was the very first line in the email, was thank you. Thank you for not aborting me. And we began to correspond over email a little bit. It was a transitional time in my life. My mom had just passed away. I just gotten married then now. And so we didn't correspond nearly as much as looking back, that I wish I would have. And so we spoke back and forth, and the first thing that she emailed me back was, Austin, I want you to know that, abortion was never an option, which was, very, encouraging to hear. But just in that short time of starting to communicate with her, I began to realize that not only did my parents choose me, Stacy and Carol, but that my biological mother made probably the toughest and probably the most selfless decision that she could ever have made by putting me up for adoption. She put my well-being before her desire and her love. As you know, as you have a child, and it's cliche, you hear it all the time from your parents growing up, you'll never know, how much I love you until you have your own child. And it's true, you don't. And to see, as we had our first child, Adelaide, and then Lemuel, to see that love that you had, and I'm sure even more so for a mom, that mother's love, to know that she was able to see that as much as I love this child, I want the best for it, and I'm going to remove myself from the equation. I'm going to not put my desires first, but put the well-being of him first. Was just such an act of selflessness. It was incredible. And so, again, perspective on the situation of your life, and I don't know who's watching or who will watch in the future, but, if you are adopted, I would just encourage you, just think through the situation and think about what perspective you're looking at it. It really, a lot of times, especially with bitterness, I believe the root of bitterness is selfishness. It's a selfish act. And that is true because you're dwelling on what happened to you in the situation of, and you're not looking at this perspective, and it's not the proper perspective. And there's an amazing illustration in the Bible that, we can get to if we have time, but about that. But so as we began to correspond back and forth through email, we started just really basic, trying to get to know each other. We did some of those stupid surveys and things like that. It was a lot of fun, just to try to get to know each other, and learn that she was from the South, and I was born in Arkansas, obviously, and she had gone from there to the University of Arkansas, and she became a not a physical therapist. She's a occupational therapist, and helps older people and people that have injuries and things like that, get them rehabilitated and reacclimated into the world. And she had moved down to Texas and lives down there. And but through that correspondence, and that went on and off, I'd say, for a couple of years. We were obviously had just gotten married. We were still in Elgin, and then we had transitioned. We moved to Iowa, and it was right after. It was actually the exact same winter that I had my knee injury, which is a whole other story. But when I injured my knee skiing, that same right after my first surgeries is when she came to Iowa. We had started corresponding through Facebook, and she mentioned, I'd love to come and meet you if you're up for that. And I said, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love it. And so we were planning all that. Then my injury happened, and I said, hey, this is what's going on, so I won't be able to walk. But she still came, and up until that time, I'd never really heard any of the story. And she had mentioned, through our correspondence, that she wanted to tell me, but just wanted it to be the right time, really would like to do it in person. And so that time came, and she came, and she began to tell her story. And coming from not knowing anything, knowing nothing. Just knowing I was born in Arkansas, knowing that she was a teenager, that was about it. That's all I ever knew. And so she began to tell me her story. And she grew up in a broken home. Her dad was an alcoholic, and so her mom had ended that relationship. It was not going well. And when that happened, her and her sister, I think she was 12 at the time. Her sister's a little bit younger than her. And so they left, and they transitioned, and they began to just stay with family. And that year, if I remember correctly, what she told me, they were in 9 different schools that year. They just were constantly moving, family member to family member to family member, moved all across the country. They finally ended and settled down in Arkansas, and her mom started a job, and they got a little apartment. It was the summer then, and during that time, obviously the mom was working, and so her and her sister were kind of left to themselves at the apartment complex, and started hanging around the wrong crowd. And she's now 13 years old, and she began hanging out with, and not dating, but essentially going that way with this guy that was like 20. And her mom found out about it, had that guy arrested, which is rightfully so. And but then her mom decided to take the girls and bring them to a girls' home. Her mom didn't really have much of a religious background, I would say, not anything like what we're accustomed to or grew up with. So the fact that she found this girls' home is just incredible, and so they went. It was a girls' home in Georgia. It wasn't even anywhere close to home. And this girls' home was an independent Baptist girls' home, and it was affiliated with a camp. And so the girls they grew up in the home. They would work at the camp through the summer as on staff, and then in the fall they would travel with the gentleman who was the director. He was also an evangelist, and he would preach, and the girls would sing and different things like that. And so she dropped them off, and they were supposed to stay for a year, I believe it was, and then she was going to pick them up. Well, within that first year, they began to communicate with their mom. They would, I always forget which way it is, but it's one of them was if they would call on the phone, the home would listen into the phone call, or if they wrote, the home would read the letters before they gave it to the girls. And I think it was that her mom would not write them because she knew that, but she would call them. Well, then she found out that they were listening in. She stopped calling. She wouldn't call anymore. So she showed up a year later to pick them up, and the girls said, Mom, we have stability, we have structure, and if it's okay, we'd like to just stay. And their mom said okay, and left and didn't come back. And so they grew up there in the home. My mom became kind of the poster child, if you will, of the home. She played the piano for them as they would travel and sing. ironically, as she's telling me the story, I asked her some different churches and whatnot, and as I found out the name of the camp and the evangelist and things, I asked my dad. I said, "Hey, have you ever heard of this guy? Have you ever heard of this camp?" He's like, "Yeah, that he would come and preach every year at Central." And so, it happened. I'm sure it happened, but that they were at Central while my mom and dad were at Central, and she would play the piano, and so that interaction happened, and they never even knew it. So she went through the home. She graduated early. It was kind of an ACE type based schooling, and so she graduated early. And the evangelist who ran the home was a close friend of Lee Robertson. The evangelist had grown up in East Texas. I think he had a third grade education, and he after third grade he went and worked on the cotton farms in the fields, and he got saved. And it's either he got saved or he got called to preach under the preaching of Lee Robertson. Brother Robertson was in the area preaching, and I think it was he surrendered to preach. And he didn't have a, like I said, a third grade education, so he didn't have a lot of to be able to to read. As I've learned more and just hearing different stories, he never really learned to read well, but he could read the Bible perfectly without any mistake. It was amazing. But Brother Robertson told him, he said, "Hey, come to Tennessee Temple, and I'll teach you everything I know, and you can come." And so he did, and he became very close with him. Well, so my biological mom graduates from school, and he calls Brother Robertson and said, "I have this girl. She's graduated from here. She's doing great. Would you consider allowing her to come to Tennessee Temple?" And Brother Robertson told him, he said, "Yes, she can come, and she can come as a missionary kid." And so essentially, her room and board and tuition was all covered. And so she went her freshman year. During the summer of her freshman year, after going there for a year, she traveled with a gentleman who he was an evangelist. He was a camp meeting singer, and his name was Howard Jewell. And he would travel to camp meetings and sing. And he was getting up in years, and so she had to get a driver's license because she didn't have it, and she would drive their van. And his wife was getting up in years as well, and she was very just not well. She was ill, and so she began to care for his wife, and she would take care of her while they traveled and while he sang. So she did that for the summer, and that's really what she's told me is that's kind of where that desire of being an occupational therapist came from, was that summer of traveling. So she went back her sophomore year, and from that, she as she was working or as she was going to school, she got a job at a local shoe store, and she was working there just making a little extra money on the side just to have some spending cash and whatnot. And through that year, through that shoe store, she met a young man that worked there. As she's telling me this story, she says, that he was the son of a Baptist preacher of local in the area. He wasn't going to school there, but he was from that area. And so one thing led to another, and through that, and she ended up pregnant. And she started getting real sick, missing classes and whatnot. Her dorm supervisor would come to her and say, "Hey, if you keep missing classes, you're going to absence out." And, had no idea what was going on, but she knew. And so she knew what was going to happen and what would be the repercussion of that. And so she just left. She said, I didn't want to. I knew I was going to break Brother Robertson's heart. I knew I was going to break the evangelist there at the camp's heart. And so she just went back. She just went back to the camp. She just left. And so she got back, and she stayed there for a little while. And from there, she transitioned. She got moved to a pastor's home in Arkansas. And she went there. She had asked. She just somewhere in that timeline there. Her and her sister kind of were kind of taken in by the evangelist and his family. They consider them to be very close, basically like family, never really legally adopted, but essentially that. And so she had wanted to kind of slip away, just the whatever, that situation, being in that situation. So she slipped away. She went to that pastor's home, and stayed there through the pregnancy, and that's why I was born in Arkansas. But during that time, she decided that she was going to place me up for adoption. And when she did that, again, this is her telling me the story. She said, when I decided to place you up for adoption, your biological dad's father reached out. And again, he was a Baptist preacher in the area. And he reached out. He had heard, that she was wanting to adopt, put me up for adoption. And he expressed interest in adopting me. And she told me, she said, I couldn't do that. I did not want you to create a division between him and his son, your biological father. I did not want, I didn't want, you to grow up with, right by a father that hated you, because when she found out she was pregnant, she had approached him and he wanted nothing to do with it. He denied it, didn't want anything to do with it. So she said, I couldn't do it. And it was God, God knew where I needed to be. And so through an acquaintance of theirs and acquaintances of Stacy and Carol Merriott, that word came and she agreed and they adopted me. Well, so now I'm in, it's 2012, I think it is, and we're in Iowa, and she's telling me this story. I'm sitting on the couch in our living room. She's telling me this story, and my mind's just reeling. One, that my grandfather on my biological mother, again, I had no idea any story. I had no idea the background. But hearing this, I'm sitting on the couch and hearing that my biological grandfather, or my grandfather on my mom's side, was a Baptist preacher, an evangelist. Hearing that my biological grandfather on my dad's side is an independent Baptist preacher, it just blew me away. I had no idea. I had no clue what my background was. And I was floored. And I wouldn't say that at that moment, the desire kind of sparked, but shortly thereafter, it sparked in me that I wonder if this grandfather that was a Baptist preacher wanted to adopt me. I wonder if he's still living. I got to find him. I got to figure out. And so our relationship has continued with my biological mom. It's great. She's amazing. She's married to a gentleman there in Texas. He's great. And I have a half brother and half sister. And that relationship has really just blossomed, and it's been amazing how we've been able to grow that relationship. But the story doesn't stop there. It continues through. And so I began that research trying to figure out who my grandfather was and if he was still living, and is there any way that I could contact him or find him. And so we began to look and try to find him. We knew his name, we knew his last name, and but we didn't really know much else besides that. And so we began to Facebook stalk some people and trying to find who we thought they might be. And through Facebook, we thought we had found them. We weren't positive, but we thought we had. And we had enlisted the help of different people. We had Mrs. Judy Garris. She, with Brother Ron Garris and Rock of Ages, they were very heavily involved with churches in that region in Georgia, that area. And so we thought maybe that they might know someone or know someone who knows someone. And so we had reached out to her, and she began to do some digging and had come up with some information for us that we were able to pursue. And the avenue that ended up working was another gentleman who works with Rock of Ages. This would have been 2007. So probably it'd been the fall of 2016. Or the fall of I think the fall of 2016 at the pastors conference in Elgin. My dad was there, and during the evening, after the evening service, they have their meal and things that were fellowship and whatnot. And there's a gentleman there from Rock of Ages named Brother Robert Keaton. And my dad went and sat down, talked to him, and just were making small talk. And he asked him, he said, "Hey, by chance, do you know a pastor?" And he named, my grandfather's name. And Brother Keaton said, "You know what? I do." And my dad, I think he kind of asked, like half expecting, just to hear, no, I don't know anyone that way. But he said, "Yeah, I do." And so my dad told him my story and told him about it. And Brother Keaton, he said we'd love to just be able to contact him in some way and talk to him and see. And Brother Keaton said, well, let me see if I can find something. And so that was in September. And we didn't hear anything from Brother Keaton until I think May of the following year. And in May, he texted my dad and said, hey, here is Austin's grandfather's phone number. And my dad gave it to me, and I sat on it for probably about 4 or 5 weeks. I was so nervous. I didn't know the situation. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if he was living with my biological dad, who the last word I got wanted nothing to do with me. And so I didn't want to cause any problems. I didn't want to cause any trouble. I just, but I had that burning desire to tell him who I was and what God had done. I wanted to share that with him. And so we prayed about it for a long time, and I finally got peace. And I even talked to Brother Keaton, and I messaged him and talked to him about it. And I said, I don't know what's going to happen here. And are you okay with me contacting him? Because he's your friend, acquaintance or whatnot. And I'll never forget, Brother Keaton texted me back and he said, if I lose a friend over trying to restore a family, that's fine. And that just meant the world to me, that he would put that risk out there for me. And so we called. I was on the way home from Elgin one night, and we made that call, and I'll never forget it. And the phone rang, and this sweet Southern voice lady gets on the phone and says hello. And I feel so disrespectful looking back now, but I said, and I named his name instead of his first name, and I didn't know what else to say. I said, is he available? And she said, yeah, sure, just a minute. And so she gets off the phone to go get my grandfather. And I'm in the car, and I'm looking at Rachel, and in my mind I'm thinking I just talked to my grandmother, and she has no idea. And so he gets on the phone, and he said hello, and I start talking to him, and basically just went into my story, told him who I was, where I was, what I was doing, told him pretty much the story that I just told you, and then ended it with, as far as I know, the way the story has been told, I believe that I'm your grandson and that you're my grandfather. And he said, yeah, 31 years ago sounds about right. And he said that's a long time ago. And I really didn't know what the next step was going to be, what was about to happen. And I think he was just trying to process everything of what I said. And
hey, Austin.
Yeah.
I am so sorry for jumping in. Give me 1 second. I'm having technical difficulty on my end. Just give me 1 second. It's cutting out. You're fine. Just give me 1 second. And
Okay.
For those of you listening, I apologize. We'll take a short intermission for just a second here. I'll be right back, Austin. If we lose connection with people that are watching, just give me 1 second. 1 second.
Okay.
Here. Can you hear me, Austin?
Yeah.
Okay. I apologize. My headphones just decided to die on me. So.
Oh, okay.
You take it away. Go ahead.
Well, we did have a comment that said that there was no sound, so I didn't know if that was.
Hopefully, we're good.
Okay. All right. Good. So he said that, and he started talking to me again. He apologized. He said, I'm a little hard of hearing, and so I think as I look back, I actually had recorded that conversation, so I'd always have it. And as you listen back to it, you can hear him. And as I'm telling the story, I don't know, just in my mind's eye, as I'm listening to what he's saying, it sounds like he's thinking in his head, okay, who is this random person calling and telling me their life story, and why are they calling and telling me this? Because he was just, oh, okay, yes, okay, yes, just that kind of, general answers. But then, so he started to ask me my information again. He wanted to write it all down. And, he said, I'm very much a proponent of a conversation in person, not over the phone. He said, I'd love to be able to, take this to prayer and pray about this. And, maybe someday we might be able to get together and talk. And, but he wanted all my information again. So I went through and told him again, told him that I was a youth pastor in Illinois, and I'll never forget. He said, "That's awesome, man. That's awesome." And so then I began to tell him about my family. I told him about Adelaide, and he asked me to spell out everything, and he was writing it down, and he would spell it out. And then he said, "Now you said you have a son. What's his name?" I said, "His name is Lemuel." And he said, "Spell that for me." I said, "Well, it's Lemuel." And he said, "Spell it again." I said, "It's Lemuel." And he says, "Lemuel." And I said, "Yeah, it's Lemuel." And as I'm saying his name, I can hear him kind of chuckling in the background. I'm wondering why. I mean, I know it's an interesting name, but I mean, come on, it's a Bible name. Why are you laughing at this kid's name? And after I said that, he came back in. He said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to chuckle, but my grandfather was named Lemuel, and he was a Baptist preacher." And I was blown away. I mean, at that moment in the car, I just started weeping. I just couldn't believe it, because we had struggled we had two names picked out for our son, and we weren't sure which one to go with. Rachel was settled on Lemuel, but I wasn't quite sure. But we decided to go with that. And it was God. God really, I believe, doing that for my grandfather. So my great-great-grandfather, Lemuel's great-great-great-grandfather, is his namesake, without us even knowing that it was. And it just was amazing how God put that together. And so we were rejoicing over that. And we ended the call, and I really didn't know where it was going to go from there. I had no idea. I thought maybe that was it, and I was fine with that. I was thankful that I got to tell him what ended up with my life. And so a little time went on. We talked again, I think a few weeks later. And then shortly thereafter, he called me and said, "We'd love to put together a trip to come meet you." And I thought, yeah, that'd be amazing. I would love that. And so they worked out the details, and they came up to Dwight. And I'll never forget when they pulled in, and they came in, and we hugged, and that was a very special moment. But then I helped them starting to unload, and we just started bringing box after box after box in, and I was wondering, what in the world what is all this stuff? And literally we had Christmas. I mean, they're, as I've gotten to know them over the past couple of years, they're just some of the most giving people I've ever met in my life. And so they had a banana box for Addie of presents, and then they had a banana box for Lemuel, and then for Rachel, and then for me. And they wanted me to open mine last. And so the kids opened theirs, obviously, and had a blast with that. And then they got to mine and opened it up, and he gave me his Bible, which is just such an amazing gift for me. I cherish that. He gave me a bunch of books that he used to use to study out of. He gave me a revolver. He gave me some knives. He gave me all sorts of different things. It was really just amazing, incredible. And but at the very top of the box, there was an envelope. And when I opened the box, he grabbed the envelope. He said, "This is last. I want you to open this up last." I said, "Okay." And so we were going through all the different things and whatnot. And he said, "This envelope, there's a story behind it." I said, "Okay." And so then, again, like he had mentioned, he wanted to talk, over in person, not over the phone. So kind of just like my biological mother, I didn't know any of the story. And so he began to go into, the story from his point of view. And I don't really like to say his side of the story. I mean, it's all the same story, but just from his perspective. And he talked about that he had gotten word his son at the time was not living at home. And he had gotten his own place, but he had been notified. He got word from the director of the camp that my biological mother had gotten pregnant, and that they believed, and they understood that his son was the father. And so he approached my biological dad about that, and he denied it. Said that I wasn't his, and just wouldn't admit it. But as they began to see, that my biological dad wasn't going to fulfill his obligation as a parent, my grandfather got the burden, the urge that I'm going to take up that responsibility. If my son won't, I will. And so they tried to help. They tried to reach out. They tried to do everything that they could. My grandmother is a very accomplished seamstress, and so she would make clothes and send them and things like that. But word came that my biological mom had moved from Georgia to Arkansas, and that came as a blow. They didn't know that she moved to Arkansas. They just knew that she moved. They didn't know where, and because they just wanted to help. They wanted to be involved and be able to help in any way that they could. And so they reached out, and they couldn't figure it. No one would really communicate or correspond with them to let them know what happened. And so again, my grandfather's telling me this story, and he said, I reached out to a friend of mine who I thought might be able to get somewhere with something or get some answers. And he said, so I called a friend of mine, Brother Ron Garris. And I'm like, wait, hold on, who? And he says, Brother Ron Garris. I said, with Rock of Ages. And he's like, yeah, with Rock of Ages. I said, he is, for all sake of better, he was like a grandfather to my wife. And it blew us away, that the correlation there. And so he had called him, and Brother Garris had reached out, and he had came back to my grandfather and said, I reached out to them. It's been decided that that you don't know where she is. They've decided that the child can be put up for adoption, and they just feel it's in the best interest of her and the child, just that you don't know. Well, that just devastated him. I mean, he had just had that desire, that burning, desire to have that relationship and to fulfill that obligation, and it was jerked away from him. And so the way he tells the story, he said, I went to God, and he said, he tells me, he said, I don't know how you talk to God, but I said, Lord, I can't handle this. How am I supposed to be a pastor? How am I supposed to deliver the goods on Sunday, week in and week out? How am I supposed to counsel people when I can't get through this situation in my life? How do I do this? And he said he really struggled with it. And he said it's like God impressed on his heart. And he said, I want you, he said, every time that you find a dime, back then, obviously, there was a lot more cash transactions than there are today. And so whenever they would get changed, things like that, he would collect these coins. And he said, every time you get a dime, I want you to pray for her and pray for the child. And he said, I can't explain it. It was just a peace that came over me that this is what I was supposed to do. I can't help, so this is what I'm supposed to do. And he said, that's what I did. He said, every time I would find a dime, whether it was on the ground, in my change, anytime I got a dime, I would pray for her. And I would pray, at that point, pray for the unborn child. I didn't know anything, just that there was a child. Then word came in July that, that she had the child. It was a boy, but that's all they ever knew, that she had it and it was a boy. And so that's how he began to pray. He prayed for me. And he began to collect those dimes. Every dime that he would pray over, he would collect. And he put them in a jar at his house. And then eventually back then you'd have to roll your coins yourself, and he would roll those coins, and he would take them down to the local credit union, and he opened up a savings account, and he began to deposit them into that account. And he did that for years. He said, as he's telling me the story, he said, so there was a time that I had to give it over to the Lord. But he said, I don't remember when that was. I just know it was years. And as he's telling me this, again, I'm on the couch just bawling, just weeping, just thinking about how good God is. That, we look at through scripture and we see how vast and how big God is. But to know that he cares for each one of us that much, that he would orchestrate our life to that specific of a detail. And so my grandfather's telling me this, I'm bawling and just amazed that God would love me that much, and that this person who I never met, never knew, had prayed for me countless times, and just overwhelmed. And he said when you called and we made the plan to get up here, he said my wife grandma looked at me and said, well, what are you going to do with those dimes? And he said, he's like, I looked at her and said, well, those are Austin's dimes. And I'm just not really even comprehending everything. I'm just bawling, not even, trying to pay attention, but just overwhelmed. And in that envelope, he pulls out a bank check. And that check represented over 12,000 prayers that he had prayed for me. It was unbelievable, incredible. I did the math, and I'm a math kind of guy. And if he had continued it up until the day that we met, it still would have been over one prayer every single day that he prayed for me. It was convicting, but it was amazing at how God, sometimes we pray for things and we feel like we don't get an answer. Sometimes God answers and we don't even know that he's answered. And we never will know that he answered until we get to heaven. And I think I don't remember if it was during the live or I think it was before we were talking about, but just that I truly feel that these past couple of years that God has, for whatever reason, has given me a glimpse of what I think heaven's going to be like for every single person when they get there. That he's, for some reason, shown me how he wove different things through my life. And he's given me that opportunity. I don't know why, but I feel like every single person is going to get that opportunity someday when they get to heaven, and God's going to show them their life and show them all those times that they asked why. God's going to answer that question and show, well, this is why. And to see how much the hand of God matters in our life and how much he's done is just unbelievable. And so he gives me that check, and just, again, I just was overwhelmed by it. And God has just really knit our hearts, and it's just been amazing how that relationship has grown. We've got the privilege to go down there and meet pretty much all the family from there, and it just from that side, and it's just been really neat at what God has done, and the heritage that I have. And there's more to the story. I know we've gone over and whatnot, but it still is just it's near and dear to my heart. And a thought that I've had from that, and just something that God has given me from this story, is a verse that probably a lot of us know, probably many of us have quoted before, but in Romans chapter 8, verse number 28, we know that all things work together for good. That thought and that phrase, all things, has just really stuck with me. And just no matter what you're going through in life, no matter what trial, literally no matter what trial you're going through, God has a plan and a purpose. I tell the teenagers this all the time, but it's something that I think each one of us as a person has to apply in our heart and in our life and understand. Nothing surprises God. Nothing is as shocked as we get when we get that phone call and we literally almost drop to our knees. We can't even stand. That feeling that we get, God never gets that feeling. He knows you're getting that call. He knew the moment you were born that you were going to get that call. And to know that he loves us that much, and to know that he orchestrates everything in our life, is just unbelievable. And that all things do work together for good. It doesn't say that all things are good. There are things in our life that are going to come that aren't good, that are hard, that are difficult, that are trying, that other people look at and think, how in the world can you get through that? But when you, again, perspective, when you can look at it from the proper perspective and see that all things do work together for good, do we have time to keep going? Okay. Just that thought, and there's a illustration in the Bible that I just think is so perfect of an illustration for that thought of perspective, is the story of King David and Ahithophel. Ahithophel was David's right-hand man. The Bible talks about that he was the man that when he spoke, it was as if the oracles of God were speaking. And you watch his life, it transitions from him being the right hand and the counselor that David would go to for battle, for war, what should I do, Remember, David was, he was the warrior king. I mean, he had accomplished so much, but he would counsel with Ahithophel, and Ahithophel would tell him yes or no. But you watch the transition of Ahithophel's life. He goes from that, he goes to conspiring with Absalom. He tells Absalom to do some terrible things. Then he goes from that to telling Absalom to allow him, and the way that it's written in scripture is so amazing, because he says, let me take, I think it's 200 men or whatnot. But then from that transition, the logical phrase of the next verse would be, let us go and we will find the king and we will kill him. That's not what it says. It says, give me 200 men and I will go find the king and I will kill him and I will bring, and it's all about him. And so you see this transition of Ahithophel, and then it ends up that Absalom doesn't take his advice, and Ahithophel gets so mad he goes home and he kills himself, and hangs himself, commits suicide. And you wonder what drives a man to go from being the right hand, the counselor of the king, to wanting to conspiring against the king, to wanting to kill the king, to committing suicide. And you look through scripture and you see that Ahithophel, from looking at lineages and different things, that Ahithophel was Bathsheba's grandfather. And you think of that situation, and no one in their right mind would say that's a good situation. Adultery, murder, all the things that transpired there, a child dying. And what's incredible is, again, perspective. That Ahithophel couldn't get over that. He couldn't get over what happened to his granddaughter. I mean, yeah, rightfully so. He should have been mad, but he could never get over it. And the bitterness just drove him to do what he did. And it just, and in the end, it destroyed him alone. It destroyed him. But on the flip side of that, you look at David. David went through that same situation, but he repented. He got right. He didn't allow it to get, I mean, he had every right to be bitter, but he didn't get bitter. God took 4 of his kids because of it. He didn't get bitter. And from that situation, what's amazing is you look, now fast forward into the Gospels, and you look at the lineage of Christ. You look at the lineage of Christ from Joseph, and you look at the lineage of Christ from Mary. Both of those lineages go back to King David. But what's incredible is both of those lineages go back to King David and Bathsheba. Mary, the mother of Christ, Joseph, the earthly father of Christ, came from that union, came from that situation. And it's interesting, as you look at the lineage, you look at, on one side, the son of David, who is in that lineage. That son is named Nathan. And what's amazing, and to me, why I believe that David was able to get over it, and he didn't have the bitterness, and he repented and was able to move on, is because he named his kid Nathan. This was the kid that was born of Bathsheba, not the one that died, but one that was born later. He named him Nathan. Nathan was the prophet that came and told him, "Thou art the man." Nathan was the man that said, "David, 4 of your kids are going to die because of what you did." And yet David could name his child after him. He got right. And again, and it's the perspective of the situation. It's not, when you look at how, you look at that situation from both sides, David was able to get through it. He was able to get repentance. He was able to move on. And God used a situation that in no one's right mind would say good, but good came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Our Lord Jesus Christ came out of that.
Amen.
From Mary being born. It's just, and really that to me has been such a blessing to me to think about, and again, to reiterate that verse, that all things do work together for good. No matter the situation, no matter how hard, no matter how difficult, all things do work together for good. And as you look through, and we don't have the time tonight, maybe another time we can talk about it, but as you look through the different verses in the Bible, and I would encourage each person that's listening to do a study on your own. Look at the different times that phrase, all things, is used. Just some that come to my mind. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. And all things were made by him. And there's so many different phrases that just, it just, to me, turns that phrase alive even more when you look through that and understand that these all things in our life, every situation, no matter how hard and how difficult, no matter what phone call you receive, God has a purpose and a plan. And when you can see his perspective on it, sometimes we have such a finite mind, it's hard for us to wrap our mind around it, what God is painting. But he is painting, and he's painting a masterpiece. And if we yield to him, if we don't let bitterness creep in, because it'll destroy you. But if you just yield to him and say, God, I don't understand, but I'm still going to trust you. I'm still going to have that faith to know that you have a purpose and a plan. In my life, being adopted, God, as I look back, I'm sure my grandfather had thoughts. Why couldn't I have this child? I'm a pastor. He would grow up in a great home, but God saw fit. God knew that I needed to be with Stacy and Carol Merriott. He knew that I needed Sharon as a sister. He knew that I needed to grow up in Elgin, Illinois at Northwest Bob Baptist Church. He knew all of that. He knew that someday I would meet Rachel and that we would get married and that we would have Adelaide and Lemuel, and that he knew all of those things, and he put it all together, and all things do work together for good. And it's just, I'm incredibly blessed, and God has done so much, and I'm so excited to see what the future holds, because it's all him. It's nothing about me. I'm no one special. And again, I don't know why, but I'm so grateful that God allowed me the opportunity to be able to see something that I never would have known. I would have never known this story, but know that there was a preacher that prayed for me, to know of my heritage, that my grandfather was a preacher, his dad was a preacher, his dad was a preacher, just the heritage that I've come from, just is incredible what God has done. And it's all really to his honor and his glory. It's been amazing. And I know I've taken up a lot of your time, but I enjoyed telling the story because it just is, it's amazing what God's done.
Amen. And for those that are listening, man, I mean, that doesn't get you fired up. You're missing something. But in all seriousness, if you would share this with someone, maybe if you don't want to share it directly to your page or something, if you probably know somebody that needs this, and with Facebook and YouTube, you can send a link directly to somebody. But share and for those that jumped in halfway through, when we end it, after about 5 minutes after we end it, it'll be uploaded, and you'll be able to go back and listen to the first part that you missed. There's almost nothing needs to be added. You did a great job with a story like that with so many details going on. You did a great job of walking us through it, because I mentioned you before.
My mind is hard.
The way my mind works, I assume people know things, and I just jump all over the place. But you did a great job walking us through it, and because I can say that because I haven't heard the entire story, and so being able to walk through that. Funny enough, only because I preached a couple of weeks or so ago, Lord laid a thought from Book of Ruth where Boaz said, leave some handfuls of purpose behind. If you remember, Ruth was going behind in this field, in Boaz's field.
Yeah.
And you can look at that story. And obviously we know that Naomi lost her husband and 2 sons and all that stuff. And the thought that God gave me was 3 points where God brought you here on purpose. He knows exactly what he has for you. He's blessed you on purpose. And that's where the handfuls of purpose, even if it's just a little bit, the crumbs from the master's table are better.
Right.
And he bought you on purpose. Boaz had to make a decision to be the kinsman redeemer. But then the only reason I bring that up is because if you go back a couple generations from David earlier, you get a guy named Boaz and his wife Ruth.
Yep.
And it's so cool to me that Jesus was totally okay with having a little bit of Moabite blood, because that redeemer, that I mean, that's so rich. But just looking at his genealogy is so amazing.
Yeah.
And then you get to live a little bit of that with the adoption. And again, there's not much needs tacked on. This is something Pastor Grimaldi mentions often. In Jewish culture, it's interesting, and you may have heard this before, but in Jewish culture, a son or a daughter, I guess, but a son, the one that's supposed to inherit, a natural born son, could be disinherited, could be
Yeah.
said you're not going to be part of the inheritance because of shame or whatever, embarrassment. But if a Jewish father was to adopt someone,
Yep.
you made the choice, and you were legally
There's
not
no
allowed
way.
to inherit them anymore. And
Yep.
you think about us being grafted into the family of God, and man, that just like you said, the throwback was my parents chose me, and that's amazing. That's so cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing it, and for those that are listening, I hope it was a blessing to you. I say it every time. I probably will end up saying it every time. With the viewer counts at 0, that was a blessing to me. But it wasn't at 0, and so I appreciate those that have listened in. Give it a share, not for my sake, not for this, but for people that need to hear something like this. There's a lot of people, and that thought of that God gave me about on purpose. Part of that was born out of my wife's situation. It's an easy situation, and you and a lot of folks and many families, but in our family, have dealt with some health situations, you included, and it's easy to think sometimes that and for you and me, God could bring us to this point and work out that whole story for you, but God can't handle right now. We get that. And so, man, that was so powerful. This will be. It takes me a little bit to upload the podcast just to get the audio and all that stuff, but I'm going to make sure this one's going to be up. I think probably in the next 24 hours or so. So keep on.
If Brother Fox can stay up all night to get you your intro, I think you should stay up all night. That's
true. Exactly. But this is on Apple Podcasts. It's on Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play. Really any way that you listen to podcasts. If there's a way that you listen to podcasts and you can't find it on there, Micah McCurry Live is the title, then let me know. And it's simple enough. I can submit it anywhere very quickly. And so let me know that. I'd like to know if there's a place that a popular place that that I should send it to. But man, this is exactly what I envision when with this, is being able to talk to people. I asked you the question, what are you passionate about? And one of the first things you said was this story, and you can feel it, but there's a good reason behind it. And this is probably the best. And now I'm messing up my record. When I talked about the Houston on Tuesday, Monday, whatever day that was, I made dead sure I asked a question and I got out of the way because I wanted to hear Brother Houston talk, which sometimes you have a back and forth, like with Mick Hall. We had this back and forth fun thing going on. But man, that was you did not go over a bit. That was awesome. And if this ends up being, I'm just curious what the time frame is now. Oh, and actually, it's only an hour and 12 minutes. That's actually it won't even be the longest one yet, unless you have more to add. But in all seriousness, no. In all seriousness, though, is any portions that come to mind now, thinking about it, that maybe could use some expounding, or just thoughts God's laid on your heart about it?
Just one thing that I was thinking about with, like I had mentioned, studying out that phrase, all things. One thing that was powerful to me is, and I'll read some scripture here real quick, but I want, I'd love for people to search that phrase out for themselves too in the Bible, because it's an amazing study. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 15, it says, "For all things are for your sakes." And then in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 10, it says, "Therefore I endure all things for the elect's sake." And in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 5, it says, "But watch thou in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of evangelists, make full proof of thy ministry." And the thought I had from those verses is that the all things that come in your life, God puts them there for you, but they're not there just for you. They're also there, like it says there in 2 Timothy, for the elect's sake. They're there. I just was mentioning this to a friend of mine, or actually it was a young man that was in our youth group in Iowa. He has a friend that's going through a hard time, and I said, they're going through this. They don't understand why, but there's going to come a moment in their ministry in the future where they're sitting down with a young person or an adult, and that person is going through the exact same thing, and they're going to be able to help them in a very unique way, a way that very few people can help them, because it's very shallow when you hear someone say, "I know what you're going through," when they have no clue what you're going through. But on the flip side of that coin, it is very deep when you have someone say, I know what you're going through, and they do know what you're going through. And it's amazing how God can use those situations so that you can help someone. And so, again, perspective, that knowing and understanding, no matter what I go through, God has a reason and a plan. And part of that reason and plan is that I'm going to be able to use that someday for the future to help someone else.
Amen.
And if you can see that, it's really, I wouldn't say it's impossible to, obviously it could be, but it's almost impossible to get bitter about any situation. When you can look at it from the perspective of God and understand, I remember, it's the illustration or story that we probably all heard, but it is, to me, it's so fitting. It's that little boy that's playing on the ground and his grandma's doing whatever those grandmas do, the needle point or whatever it is. And she's on the couch and he looks up at her and all he sees is a mangled piece of mess of thread. Makes absolutely zero sense. And he looks up and says, "What are you doing, Grandma?" And she says, "Oh, don't worry. Just keep playing. I'll show you in a little bit." And he keeps playing for a little while and he looks back up and he says, "Grandma, what are you doing? It makes no sense. It's colluded. It's jumbled. It's all crossing. Just nothing looks right." "Oh, just wait. And then finally Grandma says, "Here, come up here." And when the little boy gets up and looks at it from her perspective, it's no longer confusion. It's no longer a mess. It's a beautiful picture of a sunrise. And the same thing is true in our life. When we look up and we say, "Oh, this makes no sense. Why am I going through this? God is saying, "Well, just wait.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to look at it from my perspective and see what a masterpiece I'm creating for you in your life." And if we can get that and not be on the ground looking up, but start out looking and watching him. I don't know if you ever, I forget who the guy's name was, but there was a guy that used to paint on like PBS. He'd paint like these
Bob Ross or something.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
And it's, to me, it was, I never really watched a lot of that, but sometimes it would come on, and when I was a kid, I would watch it, and it always fascinated me, and kind of almost see like what he's going to do next. And watch how a picture takes place from him just using some brush strokes, and you think, "Oh, I could do that," and you can't. But it's amazing to watch a picture be formed. And why not get in that position with God to where you can see from his perspective from the start?
Right.
And how much more exciting it would be to know, okay, I don't know what he's doing with this little triangle looking thing that he's putting here, but I know it's going to be amazing. And in the end, you get to see, and you think, wow, he took it from there to there.
Right.
And to know that God does that in our lives every single day, that he took it from this situation that may not be good. It may be good, but it may not. But know that he works in it with everything else and produces a masterpiece for each and every one of us. I'm no one special. I'm not of any unique thing. That God's doing it for everybody. It's just, for some reason, God showed it and allowed me to see it. So, perspective.
Yes, sir. That's big. I as you probably have seen, I clip out some clips and things for people that might not watch the whole hour and 15 minutes or whatever. But I'm not sure how I clip out just the middle 45 minutes or so. But no, in all seriousness, I think just share it. Just say basically, just watch this whole thing. You just got to watch the whole thing. But man, like you said, nothing. And how I'm saying this, nothing special. God is just giving you a glimpse, just a little behind the curtain that most of the rest of us don't necessarily get to see. But if we thought about it, God's just as good to us.
Yeah.
And, we just got exactly perspective. You just got to realize, how do you want to see it? Is it always problems, or is it just the goodness of God in all things? Man, any last words? Anything you need to get off your chest that maybe just completely off topic or on topic, or anything you need to say to your teens? Maybe they're in the youth group there at Dwight. Maybe they're just knuckleheads and they need slapped around a little bit. Whatever you want to say.
Get your stuff done for convention. That's what I want to tell them.
Okay. Well, I won't ask you to name names.
Like the youth pastor did when he was a teenager. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. No, they're great kids. And I love what I do. And God he's so good, and he has blessed me so much. And I'm excited about the future. I'm excited about what the next step is. What's the next thing around the corner? Which brush is he picking up, and what is he about to paint? And I'm excited about the future of my kids, what they're going to do for God. And I'm just begging God that they will do something for him and follow his will.
Amen.
And really that's the key. The key is doing God's will, and doing God's will and getting that perspective. You'll see some amazing things in your life. You really will. And
Yes,
that'd be the challenge I would give, I guess, to, young people or anyone listening. Find God's will and do it. And you'll never regret it for a minute. God's will is incredible. It's more than we could ever dream. We in our finite minds can't put together what God can put together for our lives. If we just yield to him, he'll blow us away every single time. He's amazing.
There you go. Well, I think you gave me something great to clip out right there. I'll clip out the last minute or so. That'll be good. I can just clip out everything. It was kind of like, and I'll be done with this, but I can talk to Brother Houston. It was like basically I asked a question and then just clip out everything he said after that. Question and then right after that. But man, I appreciate it. That was helpful to me, and if nobody else, helpful to me. Amen. Well, stick around if we just sang it. I'd like to talk to you if we just sang it more if I can, if you got the time. This has been Micah McCurry Live, number 18 with Austin Merriott. You can catch it on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, Periscope. You can listen to it now, multiple different places. Let me know if you cannot for some reason, and we will get that fixed. If there is an episode with a particular person you would like uploaded ASAP, because I can only do about one a day with just time and all that, let me know. And but this one will be going up very soon. Thanks for tuning in. We are signing off.